Derman and Hostager. We can't wait to see what the day holds. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Schumacher, who's going to who's going to introduce the rules for today's meeting. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Aaron Schumacher. I'm a teacher here at Zumbrota Schools. I teach middle school. And before we begin, may I please ask everyone to rise, remove their caps for the national anthem. By the dawn's early light, for the lamp unveiled, and the twilight's last gleam, whose bright stars and bright stars through the perilous night, for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streamed, and the rocket's red glare now bounds bursting in air. It proved the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of free and the Thank you very much. I love to hear all the singing. I'm a choir teacher here, so that just warms my heart that so many people are singing. All right, so real quick, I would like to also thank Representative Craig for being here today and introduce some quick ground rules for the town hall. So there are 3 basic ground rules. This town hall has Minnesota rules, which means we will all treat one another with respect. Tough questions are great and welcomed. Obscenity is not allowed and will keep each person from enjoying the town hall. Each person will have 1 minute to ask 1 question. Everyone gets to ask 1 question before anyone gets a second question. If you would like to ask another question, you are free to get back in line at the end of the event. If you have not asked a question by the time 1 minute rolls around, I will prompt you to ask your question at that time. There will also be a bell that you hear. Angie's response to each question will be limited to 2 minutes so that we can get to as many questions as possible. If she goes over 2 minutes, I will prompt her to wrap up her comments as well. And there will be a bell as well. So with that, I turn it over to Representative Craig.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you. I like to start every single one of my town halls by asking, if you're able, the veterans in this room to stand, and if you're not, to put your hand up, please. Thank you so much. Thank you for your commitment and your service to this country. Now I'd like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you again so much for being here. And Aaron, thank you so much for everything that you do for our kids. We were just talking about the fact that Aaron has spent his entire career teaching middle schoolers. It takes a special group of people to teach middle schoolers for their whole careers. I've got 4 boys, and I have survived middle school 4 times. And that may actually be my biggest accomplishment in life so far. So all the parents out there, you know what I'm talking about. It's great to be back in Zumbrota. Mayor, thank you for being here. Thank you so much to the great public servants of this community. I had the opportunity to be here to meet the folks in the Zumbrota Independent Business Alliance a few months ago. And I have to tell you, if some of you have traveled from closer to the cities to this community, do not miss out on the opportunity to check out this downtown. I told the mayor I was going to be shameless in my promotion of Zumbrota up here this morning because it is the absolute strategic example of how you redevelop a downtown with those businesses that are just amazing. And I will also add that it was a bunch of women who did it, mostly, and this community has been recognized for that. So thank you so much. This is my 13th town hall since I've been a member of Congress. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you very much. I love this opportunity every month to come out and visit with you. Not that we always agree, but it gives me an opportunity to hear many of you. And the truth is, I've gotten to know many of you over the 13 town halls, and it's great to see you here today. Since I've been a member, I just want to recap a few things. Some of them are kind of interesting, and some of them are more serious, but I've authored 17 bills or amendments since I've been a member of Congress. I've co-sponsored 339 bills, over 2/3 of which are bipartisan. We've traveled 6,543 miles across this congressional district, which has been a lot of fun. We've responded to 36,387 letters during 2019, just to give you perspective of scale. Many of those letters came from folks sitting here in this room today. We've helped 383 Minnesotans navigate the federal government, and we've recovered almost $150,000 from the Social Security Administration, from the VA, from other agencies where our neighbors had something that wasn't exactly right, and we were able to go and recover that. During the first year of Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives passed over 400 bills, the majority of which were bipartisan. 275 of those bipartisan bills are right now sitting on a desk or in a drawer somewhere in the Senate. So hopefully in 2020 we'll find them. I just wanted to mention a few of the bills that I've authored and why they're important to this district. I want to talk a little bit more about my optimism for 2020, and I know sometimes it's tough to find optimism right now, but I'm choosing to stay optimistic. During 2019, I authored a bill that would reduce the cost of health insurance in the individual marketplace, which is a very real issue in my congressional district. It's called the State Premium Reduction Act. It has passed through the Energy and Commerce Committee, and my expectation is that it will come to the House floor sometime in the first half of this year. I also am the co-author. I worked with Republican Representative Mark Meadows. I worked with Mr. Meadows on a bill called the Payment Integrity Act. And this is a bill that has already passed the Senate, the Republican-controlled Senate, companion bill that would help us recover, prevent improper payments by the federal government in the first place. In 2018 alone, the federal government inappropriately, without documentation, paid out $151 billion that it shouldn't have. Now, you think there is a lack of controls? Over 10 years, it's over $1 trillion. And so this bill that I am co-authoring with Mr. Meadows would put controls in place, working across agencies, best practices with states, and we are working together, and I do expect that to come through the House Oversight Committee, hopefully here in the first quarter of the year. Representative Pete Stauber, Republican from the 8th Congressional District of Minnesota, we continue to work on full funding of IDEA for students with special needs in our public education system. I helped get USMCA over the finish line, helping to get a couple of changes that were absolutely critical to get it over the finish line with strong bipartisan support, and I'm very happy that that happened. And then on a personal author perspective, two of the bills that I'm really proud of in 2019, of course, was H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is sweeping campaign finance changes that would also require super PACs and corporate donors to super PACs to disclose who is actually giving that money. And then finally, my own bill is the Humble Act. If you serve in the United States Congress, you should never be allowed to serve as a lobbyist after you leave the U.S. Congress. So my hope for 2020 is that we are able to come together on a couple of issues that are near and dear to the hearts of the constituents in this district. I remain hopeful that we can get back to the table and work with the administration on bipartisan prescription drug cost reform. The House last year passed a bill that I certainly support, which would allow Medicare to negotiate drug pricing moving forward. But I'm also willing, even after passing that bill in the House, to come back to the table and say, is there something else we can work on? Is there something more that we can do? I also am going to continue to have hope and optimism that we're finally going to fund infrastructure in this country. That is one of the biggest issues. And if you live in Zumbrota or you come down to Rochester all the time, just on 52, you know, there's no better, perhaps, example in the congressional district. And I know that project is on a lot of plans, and I've toured it with Goodhue County and that sort of thing. But we have got to face that we have a crumbling infrastructure problem in this country. And in this district, highways, roads, and bridges are the absolute critical priority. So I'm going to continue to do those, push toward those two things. I'm going to continue to push to invest in our public schools, especially around special education and career skills and technical education. We'll continue to advocate in support of our family farmers. And at the end of the day, I want to make sure that we don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If we can make progress on all of these things, then I'm willing to sit down across the aisle and work toward that. Now, this week in Washington, we just got a notice last night. There's some important stuff. Headed back to Washington on Monday for votes on Monday night. Many of you know that the congressional schedule is typically Monday through Thursday in Washington, or Tuesday through Friday, where votes taken are over those 4 days. I personally always come home, almost always come home, because to me, if you really want to know how to vote in Washington, you have to get back and spend time in your congressional district. So this week on the agenda, it appears we are going to be voting whether to repeal the 2002 authorization for use of military force. This was the 2002 authorization that Congress gave that allowed us to go into Iraq and take out Saddam Hussein. The last thing I believe we need in this country is another series of never-ending wars in the Middle East. And so this is just, you know, as we pledge an allegiance to the flag, as we sing the national anthem, there is no greater responsibility a member of Congress will ever take than to take a vote on whether to send our young men and women, our mothers and fathers, our families, our neighbors off to war. So this is something that will continue to be, I believe, on the radar. The other thing that's on the agenda over the coming 2 weeks is we are going to vote on the PRO Act. The PRO Act protects the right to organize and collectively bargain in this country. And so as many of you know, Minnesota is at a particular disadvantage because the right-to-work states around this country do not have the strong organizing laws, and so we're going to seek to pass that and level the playing field. And then finally, I was excited to see on the agenda for the coming 2-week period back in Washington, we are going to vote to remove the deadline for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. So there are a number of exciting things coming up over the next little bit, and I just wanted each of you to know all of those things. Then my last remarks, and then I promise we'll open it up for questions and have a robust Q&A period, is the end of the year spending packages are always really interesting in that usually everybody comes out just a little bit unhappy. And if everybody's a little bit unhappy, it's probably a pretty good spending bill. And so I was really pleased to see the administration come together with the Congress at the end of the year to pass a spending bill, avoid a government shutdown. As many of you know, I was sworn in 12 days into a government shutdown that went 35 days and was the longest shutdown in American history. So that we avoided, but as part of that package, we were able to secure an increase in $400 million in funding to the Individual Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. $400 million increase. This is something that Representative Stauber and I have been working hand in hand on all year long, and we wrote a letter together to Speaker Pelosi and to Leader McCarthy, encouraging them to prioritize special ed funding in the spending bill. We were also able to secure a raise in the minimum age to buy tobacco to age 21 in this year-end spending package, which is a serious public health issue, the idea of addiction. Increased Head Start funding because we know there are inequalities in our education system that we still need to address. We were able to increase Pell Grant funding in this spending bill. I spent most of my day yesterday in Northfield gathering ideas from the kids, the students at Carleton and St. Olaf on the Higher Education Reauthorization Act, which will be coming up over the next few months in Congress to get their ideas on how to make access to federal funding even better. Couple of last things. We were able to secure additional funding for rural broadband. When I think about the fact that we could have rural broadband in 99% of America, broadband, high-speed internet, access, it's an equity issue too, right? We could have that in 99% of America by 2025 for about a $30 billion spend. Remember what I told you a minute ago about the Payment Integrity Act, and that in 2018 alone, improper payments from the federal government were $151 billion. We could fully fund special education 4 times over. We could fully fund access to high-speed internet. This is about good management of taxpayer dollars. And then finally, I will want to mention that there was approximately $20 million in that year-end spending package to study gun violence prevention measures in this country by the Centers for Disease. So the CDC got that funding, and these are many, but not all of the issues that obviously we've been talking about over the last 13 months. So with that, I want to say thank you for making the trip to Zumbrota, or for those of you who I know live here in this community, for making it such an amazing community, Mayor. And again, shameless promotion, go have lunch in downtown after my town hall. Thank you.
At this time, we'll follow the 1 minute to ask your question, and I'll remind you at the end of the minute, and then you'll hear a bell as well to ask your question. Thank you.
Madam Congresswoman, thank you
for having this event. I was gonna ask. Raise the mic. Again, thank you for having this event, and to your comments, as we all appreciate, to avoid wars, why do you believe that there was so much condemnation to our president when he pulled troops out of Syria?
Well, I think the troops that, oh, and by the way, I've graduated to readers in 2020, so, you know, for everyone who understands what I'm talking about. You know, I think that the reason there was condemnation is because we need a small strategic group of folks who are training in Syria. So if you think about how do we create a situation where America's safer, we have to have troops in places where we're working with our allies to make sure that ISIS and other terrorist organizations are kept in check. And so I think, you know, there was just a small number of troops there. And from our perspective, we have to continue to make that presence, because just having the mere presence of the U.S. in those locations has an outsized influence in national security. Over the last 6 months, we have moved an additional 15,000 troops to the Middle East. And I personally don't believe some of the decisions have been very strategic in the last several months. And we know that having those troops in the Middle East can often turn into never-ending wars. 17-year wars, the longest war in American history, continues in Afghanistan. And so I think we have to be smart, we have to be focused, we can't be afraid to stand up for America. Our service members are the bravest and they're the best, but at the same time, we have to work with our allies and be strategic. So thank you again for being here. This is the most important topic, national security, that a member of Congress has to be focused on, and the idea of sending our troops internationally. And by the way, Sam will not hesitate to ding me. So thank you, Sam.
What is the best way to address you? Congressman Craig or?
Congressman, Congresswoman, Angie,
Congresswoman Angie.
any
Thank
of them.
you. Congresswoman Angie, thank you for coming. Last year, we had that March for Life rally where these young men or people from Covington were put unfairly before the national audience. And CNN was held accountable for that, which was something recently we've heard. Right? Am I right? Right? Okay. Oh. Well, CNN was held accountable for the way they attacked the Covington kids. And it came out recently. And this last October, there was a comment made by Hillary Clinton towards Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in Democratic primary, and they're grooming her to be a third-party candidate. She's a favorite of the Russians. And then when they pressed who was this person, when asked, the former Secretary of State was referring to Gabbard. Clinton's spokesman said, the nesting doll fits. If the nesting doll fits. This is not some outlandish claim. Sorry, wait a minute. Oh, okay. The question I have is, this article talks about how hearsay is okay for Congress people to share, whereas people usually are held accountable. And I guess my question is, when, you know, Tulsi doesn't have anything because she's a congressman, and you can say these things towards a congressman, how do you rise above hearsay in being able to support truth and not get caught up in the hearsay that we all get caught up in? Does that make sense?
It does, and thank you so much for being here. You know, it's interesting because I myself find that at times, you know, you gotta turn off MSNBC, you gotta turn off Fox News, and you gotta look at the data and the details yourself. And that's why, you know, I continue to encourage my constituents to look at original sources and to make up their own minds about issues. You know, I learned early on in this role that I need to be responsible, individually responsible for what I do and say, But that, as a general rule, I try hard not to comment on what my other colleagues say, because that's a rabbit hole you know, I'm happy to stand in front of you and be held account to the things that I say, but what other people say, I can't control. So we'll leave it at that. But you're right. It is more difficult to find objective news, but I also think that journalists are doing their level best in many organizations, and in particular, I get on the airplane every week when I go back to Washington with approximately 17 newspapers from my congressional district. I find that tends to focus me most out of any other method on what our district wants me to be talking about and thinking about. So that's how I get my priorities, talking to you, these town halls, and reading my local newspapers, because cable news these days is tough. So thank you again for being here.
Morning, Angie.
Morning, Steve.
Last time we spoke, we talked about late-term abortions, and the result sometimes result in live births, and then those babies are left to die. And you told me it was a myth, and I have proof here by the Minnesota Department of Health. It's a report. It's not a myth. It's a fact. And my concern is these precious little babies. Sometimes they live for hours. Sometimes they live for days. I know one child that lived for 2 days because I know a nurse that was there with her. And I tell you, no law to protect them. And 80 times, at least 80 times, I went through the House trying to get a law to protect the Abortion Survivors Protection Act, trying to get that through. And your constituents have blocked that 80 times. My question is to you, honestly, because 90% of the people do not believe in infanticide, which this really is infanticide. It's killing of a child. And it's no different what Gosnell did out when he got put in prison for doing what he did. Just a little bit more clean. My question to you is, what's it take for you to come and support that when 90% of people support that?
Thank you, Steve. Steve and I have gotten to know each other over the course of the first 13 months in Congress, and I have a great deal of respect for how passionate you are about this issue. And the truth is, you've caused me to go back and talk to a lot of physicians, being here and asking me these questions. But Steve, respectfully, I have to set the record straight. There is no such thing as an abortion up until birth. That is what the physician community tells me. The idea that there is legislation to somehow allow a woman to have an abortion until birth is just not true. It's not how medical care works. Abortion late in pregnancy is rare, and when it does occur, it's almost exclusively because a woman's health is at risk, a woman's life is at risk, or there is a severe fetal diagnosis. So respectfully, I know you would come to this sincerely. If you have a study, please give it to my staff. You know I'm willing to look at it. But I truly believe that if you talk to physicians in the medical community, you will find that what I've just told you about how rare this is true.
I have proof of it, but thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
I have some concerns about the integrity of your fellow representative from Minneapolis, Omar. She the other day mentioned how she was in PTSD because of the taking out of the terrorists from Iran, so she must have been in love with him. Basically, she has made numerous comments about anti-Semitic thoughts, which I'm sure 95% of Minnesotans have no agreement with. So my question is, why cannot your Speaker, Pelosi, have enough guts to censor her? They've talked about in general, but not mentioning her name. Gutless.
Well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate everybody who comes out, and especially those that wanna let me know their thoughts on topics. Look, anybody who wants to come here and ask me about something that I vote on or believe as a duly elected member of Congress from this congressional district, that is fantastic. But the minute I start getting into duly elected other members and what they're doing or saying, I don't agree with the Congresswoman on everything, but she's a duly elected member of Congress from her congressional district. And so I'm gonna come and I'm gonna tell you what I believe. I'm gonna vote my district, and at the end of the day, I really appreciate the opportunity to represent you. Thank you. Can I just say you have the best swag before you ask me a question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I've heard you say that you are pro-choice, and I think that's great, because having lived under the communist regime, where there are hardly any choices at all, I am very much pro-choice. I firmly believe that every parent should be able to choose the schools for their kids. I also firmly believe that every worker should be able to join a union if they so desire. However, forcing children into mediocre schools or workers to join unions as a condition for employment is denying them their choice. So how can you justify being pro-choice when it comes to murdering babies, but not for allowing parents and workers to make their choices?
There's a lot in that question.
Yes.
Thank you. And Alexandra, thank you for being here again
My
to my
pleasure.
town hall. Look, here's what I believe. If a group of employees at an employer want to organize together in order to negotiate their benefits, negotiate their pay and their health care, I think that ought to be a right in this country. And that is exactly what the PRO Act will do. And since you compared it to other choice issues, I will tell you what I believe is reproductive health care is health care. Period, full stop. And that the federal government does not belong in a health care decision with any man or woman.
I've just got a question, your choice of backing the Democrats' choice to go after Trump on impeachment. He doesn't, everything that I've looked at, and I watch it real close, I haven't found a single thing that he's done legally wrong, and yet, from what I've said, your record shows that you voted for his impeachment, or for them to go after him, and I find that way wrong.
Well, I appreciate you being here and coming directly and asking me. You know, I could stand here and go through all the evidence that was obtained during the House Intelligence Committee. I've read every single word of it. In fact, I took an extra day to make a decision about how I would vote after it was all done and the articles had been sent over from the Judiciary Committee. The last thing I wanted to do is to vote to impeach any president when I became a member of Congress. I came here to help drive down the cost of prescription drugs. I came here to fight for transportation and infrastructure funding for special education. But just as a point of fact, not me, not Democrats, but the Government Accountability Office just a week ago last Friday came out with the report that confirmed withholding the military assistance of congressionally appropriated aid was in fact a violation of the law. So that there's no politics in the nonpartisan Government Accountability Office. So at the end of the day, I've said this before, if this were a Democrat, I would have said the same thing because I believe the facts support it. This is not about this president. This is about the presidency.
I'm sorry, you're wrong.
That is what this is about for me. And right now, I understand it's very partisan, but for all of you here, I would encourage you to read the record, read the evidence, because if you do, I believe you will come to the same conclusion conclusion that this president gave us no choice but to send this over to the Senate, where it's the Senate's job to figure out what the results are. And to do that, we ought to have witnesses.
The Senate is not the House. The House had the chance, they decided not to do it because they didn't have a leg to stand on. And as far as the AOC, every president in history has broken the law according to them. I don't see the rest of them going in for impeachment because of that. So if you say it's not partisan, but you can surely see that it is. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, Angie. I'm wondering why certain people come into this country.
You gotta speak in the mic.
Sorry. Come into this country, wherever, I'm not judging any group as such. The first thing they do is give them Social Security money and other things when other people don't. And if you're disagreeing with me, which is fine, I know two people that worked at the Social Security, and they said that's what they do. They get money that they haven't even earned yet. So that means the worker gets to pay for it. No. That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
The cops have to speed to catch a speeder, but you cannot break the Constitution to try to prove that the president broke the Constitution. The Democrats are telling you that the president is seeking foreign influence, and they hope that you forget that the DNC hired a foreign spy to create the Steele dossier. The Democrats state that we're going to have a partisan predetermined trial in the Senate. They hope that you forget that you had a partisan predetermined trial in the House. It's not just the Republicans that are under attack here. If you're a Democrat, you need to realize that Nancy Pelosi, who does not run Minnesota, held on to these articles of impeachment up until the point that they could take the top people.
Please ask your question.
My question is, if your candidate for president is not on the ballot box because Nancy Pelosi held on to the impeachment until the point that the top Democratic contenders were removed from the campaign trail, will you join me on November 3rd to vote against Angie Craig and take partisan out of Minnesota?
You know, that is the most beautiful part of democracy, is I get to reapply for my job every 2 years. And I appreciate you being here. I know you've been at some of my other town halls, and you know, at the end of the day, the American people have that decision in their hands. And that's what is the most important thing. Are we going to protect our democracy? Are we going to protect our elections? Are we going to make sure that America continues to be the leader in democracy around the world? So I appreciate you being here very much.
Can I tell you what you did?
No.
You made
My
it
turn.
possible.
Excuse me. Representative Craig, first I'd like to thank you for out of 723 opportunities to vote, you did not miss one, 2019 to 2020. Thank you for that.
It's not as easy as it looks to always make it to the vote either. So it's a lot of fun trying to run yourself down to the House floor no matter what you're doing when they call unexpected votes.
We see that and thank you. I wanted to ask you too, if I see that legalization of marijuana has moved through the Judiciary Committee and is now coming forward. I just wondered if when this bill came forward, you would see to it that there's something so those currently in prison would be released when the bill passes. That's what I'd like to know. Thank you.
You know, I haven't read that bill yet. There are only, tens of thousands of bills that have been introduced in this Congress so far. So let me take a look at that one out of judiciary. Certainly, I believe that we should decriminalize marijuana in this country, that there are a lot of folks locked up who shouldn't be with nonviolent offenses related to marijuana. There's no doubt about that. So you have my commitment that I'll take a strong look with that lens.
Thank you for considering it, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. As a Minnesota woman 2 years ago, or over 2 years ago, I listened to you on the campaign trail, and you reiterated over and over how you would represent all of your districts. And actually, I was pretty excited about that. All of your districts. At this point, as I understand it, after you shortly got into office, you then joined the Progressive Caucus. Can you explain to me why you would want to be on the Progressive Caucus, as it is the socialist far side of the Democratic Party, and obviously 50% of your constituents were just ignored? Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here. I'll be happy to explain it. I'm a member of the Progressive Caucus, and I'm a member of the New Democratic Coalition as well, because there are some issues, like social issues, that I'm absolutely progressive on when you look at my voting record. And there are other issues, like fiscal responsibility, that I'm a little more moderate on. And I can tell you, early on in my tenure, I got more protests from the left than the right. And part of that is because I'm not afraid of looking at the issue and saying, I'm going to vote the issue, not necessarily with the party or with the caucus. And so the caucus knows that because I like to be in the room to listen to all sides of an issue, including my Republican colleagues on these issues. And then I'm going to vote what I believe is the right thing to do for this congressional district. I'll give you an example of that. I got Democratic colleagues who didn't like it when I put forward an amendment to have a pay raise for members of Congress stricken from a spending bill. But I was sworn in 12 days into a government shutdown that went 35 days, the longest in American history. And I wasn't going to put my name on a raise for members of Congress. After that, I didn't think we deserved a raise for the job that we were doing at that moment in time. So I'm going to go to both meetings of progressives and moderates in the caucus, and then I'm going to make a decision based on what I believe is the best representation of this district.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking our questions. I think it might have been answered, but is it my understanding that you would vote to legalize marijuana?
No, what I've said is I do think we need to take a look at decriminalizing federally individual use of marijuana. In terms of federal legalization, I'm open to it, but I think we need a little more information. Public health officials have not come to a consensus on at what age it should be legalized. The young folks' brains are still developing. Some public health officials believe that it's important to not legalize it up to 25, until 25. So I think there's more study and debate warranted, but the first thing we need to do is declassify it as a class 1 drug in this country, because that is what is leading to the, one reason is leading to the criminalization of it. And we need to have clinical trials that give us the information we need to make that final decision. I'm certainly open to it, but I listen to public health, and frankly, I listen to law enforcement, who also don't have the ability to quickly analyze and test on the side of the road whether someone is driving impaired.
That so it's legal or making it so that it's not a criminal act, and yet you're increasing under the cannabis, they haven't started studying that for USDA or anything else. I don't know how you can square those two if you increase one that we know about, but you decrease the other that we don't. So I wanted to see what your thoughts were.
Yes, Congresswoman Craig. My name is Lawrence Tomford. I live in Mineola Township, just outside of the city limits of Zumbrota. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. Well, I have an issue with the federal government. It's a personal issue, and today my reputation is on the line. You can determine whether I'm telling a little bit about my issue. I have an issue with the U.S. Forest Service. I was involved in a land exchange. I was 29 years old in 1965 when this was over with. After the land exchange was over, this land exchange was never over, and they can change whatever they told me in 1965 to whatever some signed papers saying this is what we're doing. This is what the land that we're giving to you in exchange for the 91 acres that this friend of mine exchanged with the federal government. I didn't mean the word illegal. I meant the fact that they just simply, it doesn't make any difference what they signed their name to. Those facts are, they're saying these documents are not part of the land exchange.
Can you please ask your question?
Now, yes. My question is, in your opening remarks, you had said that you had sent letters back to people. I've contacted your office. I think your staff knows about this, but I have not received a letter back from you. I would appreciate it, and my question is, would you and your staff meet with me at some later time, look at the facts, and make the U.S. Forest Service come to the table and have the public decide whether there's some wrongdoing or not?
Well, let me look into it. I honestly would want to look to see if you, we responded to you, and just the facts of your case. I don't know them here as I stand here today, so I'm not sure who you spoke to on my staff. And you know, I'm going to be honest with you. I try to encourage federal government agencies all the time to do what I'm asking for. A lot of the times they don't listen to me. So it sounds like the Forest Service that's under the jurisdiction that will Secretary Perdue, and so we'll take a look at that, and we'll see if there's any follow-up that we can provide to Secretary Perdue. Nick Coe is my district director. I don't know if you've talked to him, but he's the head honcho in my district, so I point him out so that you can go talk to him and make sure that he's got all your information.
I cannot be a whistleblower without your help.
Thank you.
I'm a little on the short side, so. So my name is Siri. I'm a special education teacher. I live in Red Wing. My question has to do with the funding that you and Representative Stauber had helped to secure. So obviously we all know special education is one is critically important because it has far-reaching effects into our communities. So I guess my question is, now that we've had kind of this positive move, right, with some increased funding, do you anticipate that maybe there's a little bit more understanding on the part of other members of Congress, or more interest in finding a better solution to solving some of our needs down down here in the trenches.
Well, thank you, and more importantly, thank you for teaching our young people. Thank you so much. Thank you. Shout out to teachers, right? The answer is yes. I mean, you know, one of the values of having a Democrat and a Republican work together on this issue has been that we've been able to go to our colleagues who are not on the IDEA Full Funding Act and have those robust conversations. And many of the mayors be pushing this. You know, if we don't fully money out of the general operating budget, or they have to increase class so that's the value of it. And if you still don't believe me, the reason my local mayors are so that the federal government should set, you know, general guidelines, but that most of the decisions should be made by our local then doesn't give you the resources to fund it. And then we get even more problematic when I get dinged. We get even more problematic
I live in Red Wing. I happen to be the secretary of Habitat for Humanity of Goodhue County. And also we're just going to start work on a home in Lake City. We haven't done a home in Zumbrota for a while. So if you desperate need.
It is. I know you're from Red Wing, and because of that, I know that, you know, communities across this congressional district, folks that access to childcare, because we can have as many jobs in Red Wing as so let me start with, if you do want to build a Habitat for Humanity home in Zumbrota, I'll be the first one to come and volunteer with you. What brings us together is community. What brings us together is helping our neighbor, and we need to remember that, and I'd be for housing assistance. You know, when you look at it, it's not as simple as it sounds, right? The minimum wage in this country is $7.25 an hour. There is no one who could work 40 hours a week and afford even an apartment near the Twin Cities, and not in Zumbrota either, and support a family of 4. So we need to be looking at what are the programs that we can support We also need to be looking at, you know, how can your community partner with organizations on affordable housing projects? And I've been in a few of those communities throughout the 2nd Congressional District who have partnered very, very successfully at the local and the federal level. So it's not as simple as it sounds, and anyone who stands before you, especially members of Congress, and tells you that they have all the answers on how do we solve the affordable housing crisis in this country, hasn't studied the issue enough to know that there are a number of things that we still need to solve. So thank you.
Hi, Angie. My name is Mike Johnson. As my wife and I drove down from Red Wing today, I couldn't help appreciate several local solar farms along the highway. And whether or not people agree with me that humans have and all kinds of public and private businesses are going the way of renewable energy. One of, I guess, so my question is, what funding is available and what movement is there toward more available funding for local inefficient transmission lines and all of that? Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here. And yeah, this is an amazing drive when you're coming down 52 to Zumbrota. When it comes to addressing the issue of extreme weather and a changing climate. What you mentioned is absolutely true, is that the market itself is moving toward clean and renewable energy because they too realize that it's more cost effective, that it doesn't require the subsidies that now coal and oil requires. But I do think it's a transition and that we have to be thoughtful and aggressive in our policies. You know, the House this session has established the Select Committee on climate change. I support moving us back to the standards that we set for ourselves in the Paris Climate Agreement. I supported the Clean Power Plan. You know, I do think we have to realize the economic cost to this nation of extreme weather and of not acting, because that is going to end up costing us even more than if we do act. That's why I'm a strong supporter of Representative Ted Deutsch's bill, a carbon fee and dividend bill, which is revenue neutral to the country. And instead of putting money in the form to the U.S. Treasury, it would return those dollars to U.S. households as we make the energy transition. One thing that I know we're going to be doing here in 2020 is reauthorizing surface transportation in this country. We also, at some point, I believe, are going to have to move forward with a transportation and infrastructure bill, and that'll be an opportunity to integrate climate-friendly policies as part of that package. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that solar spills are a lot less difficult to clean than oil spills.
It is now noon, and we have the room rented out for only a small amount of time, so we'll have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, Angie. I have a request of you and then a comment to follow. I just want to say thank you for the advocacy that you offer our part of the country as your voice on the Ag Committee, the House Ag Committee. We're really proud of the work that you try to do on our behalf. And in that note, I would encourage you to advocate for the renewable fuel standard to be raised to E15 so that we can use up the corn that's grown around here, and also to support the movement of hemp production. And anything that's made out of fossil fuels, you know, the plastic that can be made out of hemp, and it would be just better for our rural economies. And finally, I just would like to say that I've known you for a while, and I've been to several of your town halls, and I have such an appreciation for the respect that you show for everybody, that you're willing to listen to everybody's point of view, and that you are holding your promise that you would represent all the people in your district. And I just want to say thank you for that.
So, as you can tell, I know Linda. Linda has had an active role in the Minnesota Farmers Union for years. So thank you for working on behalf of Minnesota farmers. I also see in the back, just because you're standing right in front of me, Les Anderson. He is the president of the Minnesota Corn Growers. So I just want to acknowledge him in the back. And then, you know, she's standing back there, so I can't help myself because you're talking about farmers. I want to say hello to Katie Brenny. Katie Brenny's in the back. She's a cattleman from Mazeppa. Woo! She is a cattlewoman from Mazeppa. She and her husband Ted farm by flashlight, basically, while they both work full-time jobs to pay for the health insurance. And Katie was, which is why I'm so willing to take the legislation that Minnesota put in place around the State Healthcare Premium Reduction Act to the federal government. And then I'll just end with this. Katie has recently been volunteering. You've been substitute teaching. And so she's on my farm advisory council as well as Les and Linda. And so she told me she was substitute teaching, and I got an earful on what it's like to substitute teach recently. So thank you for that. You're an absolute star. Thank you for everything.
Hi, my name is Bridget King, and I was just going to ask about, I had been to another town hall just listening, and you had voiced some concern about foreign interference. Voting and such, so the foreign interference for voting and, you know, elections and having free and fair elections and such, which of course is a great concern. But I'm also super concerned, more so than the foreign, about the internal big tech. They have unprecedented access to our children, everything and everybody.
Did you say big tech?
Yes.
Yeah, speak into the mic.
So with Google, you know, everybody, Microsoft, Amazon, it's rampant, and they have, so my concern really is about free and fair elections and the integrity of our elections when we talk about foreign interference, but nobody's talking about how Google and Microsoft,
Facebook.
Everybody has said, Facebook has said that they want to do everything that they can to, you know, say stop Trump, which is fine. I don't care what party you're stopping. The fact that you have ginormous tech industry and their ability to influence people is terrible. And I wanted to know, like, because they either have to choose between a platform or a publisher, right? So are you willing to pass, you know, I mean, I'd hate to have another law, but, you know what I mean, just something that says they need to choose between a platform and being a publisher, and that they can't, you know, politically censor people because they don't like them.
This goes into a number of issues. Let's start with election integrity and defense from, you know, hacking, you know, gosh forbid our polling systems, our election systems at the ballot box. There was a bit of money in the appropriations bill that hopefully will get down to the states to make sure that we have as robust possibility. But on the tech side, you know, it's interesting because I think we probably all agree. We found an issue we all agree on, maybe not completely for all the same reasons, but I am very concerned that the social media platforms are not regulating political discourse in the same way that if you put an ad on TV is not regulating. If you put an ad on TV, you at least have the responsibility to make the case that it's true. If you put an ad on some of the social media platforms today, it doesn't even have to be true. And that is not no political party, no political candidate should have lies told about them, right? So it applies to all of us, no matter who you support. There ought to be more regulation governing, and maybe it's exactly what we have for truth and credibility on a broadcast network or a cable network. Maybe it's different, but yes, we ought to have a more robust conversation about this, and we ought to have legislation that finally makes sure.
You guys have given them this freedom. You can take it back. I mean, I'm on a free and fair internet, don't get me wrong, but you can't let them be a publisher and a platform, because they are censoring people. They are influencing. Just real quick, last election between, whatever, it asked me a question on Facebook, who are you gonna vote for? And I said, A or B. And from that moment forward, everything about the person, who I said was gonna vote for, I got negative ads, things that were not true. And had I not done my homework, just think about how many people they're influencing, saying like, oh, you're wonderful, the candidate that you're voting for is terrible, 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 they've done all these bad things. See what I mean? And that's where I'm concerned. It's not like, let's regulate them or pass law. You already have stuff there. We already have laws in place. It's you as Congress have to make them decide, are they a publisher or are they a platform? You can't be both, because that way they can do whatever they want at any time. We can't sue them. We can't do anything. We have no recourse.
I think we need to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a lot in what you said we agree on. Aaron, I just want to say thank you again. For those of you who didn't get, I don't know, I'm not the moderator here, Les.
I don't have a question, I just have a statement. Welcome to Goodie County.
Can't hear ya.
Can you hear me now?
We can't hear the tall folks, have you noticed?
Anyways, welcome to Goodie County. I'm a little surprised by some of the tone of the questions today, I guess. I didn't plan on speaking, but I'm probably one of the biggest Trump supporters in here, but I'm also one of the biggest Angie Craig supporters. Angie does a great job in DC. I've been out there numerous times, and she is well thought of in DC, works hard, works even harder back at home here. And I just want to say, keep up the good work. Thanks.
Well, the biggest surprise is I didn't know he supported me. No, thank you for that. If you did not get a chance to ask a question here today, I assume we have some comment cards handy that we could make sure that I get the question that you wanted or the statement that you wanted to make. Sorry we ran out of time, but obviously this has been a robust conversation that crossed a ton of topics. I just want to end today by thanking Aaron again for being here and for moderating this town hall, and for thanking all of you. At the end of the day, the great thing about a democracy is that we can come together, and the great thing about Minnesota is that we're willing to come together, and we're willing to have a robust conversation and disagree vigorously at times, but in the most respectful way. And so every single town hall I've had has been exactly this. Good people who maybe don't agree on everything, but who are willing to come together and still engage with one another. So I can't thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming out today, for being part of our community, part of our democracy. Let's work together to protect this right to continue. Thank you so much.